So I wanted to do a space-time travel communication coordinate adjustment today based on the views, which we take as a form of communication in our system of space-time travel communication coordinates. And as my subscribers, listeners, and viewers all realize, that this is one of the main systems of space-time travel communication coordinates, is looking at the videos on the current front page and assessing these views as a form of communication that involves observation as communication. And that's taking these at their word, which of course they aren't always, because the YouTube algorithm that records the views is often off, and for example, some of the views will actually decrease in number, which is realistically and factually impossible, having to take back a view. I didn't see that. I guess the idea of "I didn't see that" belongs to the first of these three monkeys. But we, in any case, we take them for the most part, in quotation marks, at their word. And I was looking at the series of numbers, and these series of numbers a few minutes ago were designating 10, 4, 2, and 10 once again. And of course, there are a number of ways of organizing those numbers. Organizing them in terms of the following sets. 10. So that could be either the simple space-time travel communication coordinate set 10, or the complex one, and then the number 5. And so that could be one of 2, 10, and 5s. And then, of course, there's the number, like I said, it was, 4, a few minutes ago. And so let's just keep it at 4. So the one that was appealing to me, I'll go to what the number that's appealing to me now is. And given that the number is now 10, 5, and 2, and 10 again, let's go to the number 105 to 10. Okay, so understanding that we conceive of these playlists in terms of circularity rather than in terms of a mere vector from a point 1. This would be space-time travel communication 1051 in the complex set to 30, that we can go back to 31 simply by imagining this as 31 and then down to 60. So if we do this 7 times, we get to this number. So 7 times 30 is 210. And so if I look at this string from 10 to 5 to 2 to 10, in the complex set, my space-time travel communication coordinate would be degrees of freedom. And of course, degrees of freedom in this set, irreversible entanglements by Moore Mother, is a metaphor for this scientific concept, or I don't know what's scientific concept is that. Anyway, it's a structure of parameters that's used in a number of different scientific discourses. That sounds cumbersome, but that is a better way to put it. And even if you look it up on Wikipedia, it's pretty easy to follow, and it explains basically what this idea is, right? In many scientific fields, the degree of freedom of a system is the number of parameters of that system that may vary independently. And of course, so going back to the space-time travel communication coordinate sets themselves, right? So those parameters involve different ways that we can organize these numbers. We can organize them as 10 and 5. We can organize them in terms of the complex set or the simple set. So as long as the number doesn't exceed, what's countable, we can organize them in longer or shorter strings of ways that seem more or less relevant. Now, but that degree, right, of parameters, that degree of freedom within the counting system of the space-time coordinates is only one set of a series of degrees of freedom that are involved in our organization and rewriting of the system, right, according to whatever needs we might have. Now, I have a list of like changes that need to be made in the system based on what redundancies are already there, given that there are two sets, right, the complex set and the simple set, and ideally, like, there would be minimal redundancy within the two sets. So one of the projects and one of the degrees of freedom or parameter for making those adjustments is reducing the number of redundancies between one set and another. So the way that that's done is basically the following. If there is a complex set, right? Say the complex, we don't have a complex set for Herbie Hancock, but we actually need one, because one of the other parameters for making those changes is that anything that exceeds 4 independent sets within the simple configuration of sets should be made into a complex set. And I believe that there are either 4 or 5 Herbie Hancock sets in the simple playlist, and that could easily become a Herbie Hancock playlist in the complex set, right? And then we'd need to replace, to reduce the redundancy, those 4 sets of Herbie Hancock with some other 4 sets of independent things that haven't been placed in a complex set yet, and that need to be organized into or incorporated into the simple set, right? So those, I just talked about 2 parameters that are slightly different, but that kind of crisscross. And then, so we have the ways of sorting the views parameter. We have the reduction of redundancy parameter. We have the parameter that informs us that anything larger than a set of independent recordings within the simple set should be made into a complex set based on an identity such as Herbie Hancock. And then we have this political parameter that involves making references to our ongoing commentary on the fascistification of the United States, so that anything in the news that involves some Trumpian project to reduce our freedom, or that that challenges our rights, or that oppresses any of us here within the United States, or globally, or anything that destroys the planet, all of these various aspects of politics, we attempt to address in the changes that we make within the system, right? So that the changes that we make become either an analogy of something that is of present concern, or they become critique and satire, of a particular event or political project, and that's should be obvious to anyone who pays attention to our channel, right? Okay, so what this number was before, that's a series of parameters, and we may talk about more parameters, as we go along, right? And and these parameters influence, the changes that we make. And the other parameter is that we want to respond to, our interpretation of the communications that are sent using space-time travel communication coordinates. And sometimes we respond and sometimes we don't. And if we respond, we tend to respond, to the more sophisticated and more engaging and interesting, in a certain sense, numerical values as communication forms than to the simple ones. And I found this one, obviously, based upon the discourse that I'm producing right now, this reference to degrees of freedom, to be particularly engaging. Now, all of that going on, and then degrees of freedom also represents what More Mother does as interpreting, right, this concept and construct in scientific discourse of parameters of freedom, and in the instance of the scientific construct, the freedom is variables, right? But in the metaphor, right, that isn't listed in the song, freedom isn't variable. It's rather a notion of liberty, and the degrees of freedom, depend upon positionalities, right? Positionalities and positionality, I mean, how one both defines oneself, but in relationship to social constructs and performativities of authorization, how one's identity is constructed for one within these variable parameters that, one only has so many degrees of freedom to define oneself, right? So, and within, racial constructs of identity, which are largely, as we've argued so many times, mythical and fictional, and have no scientific basis whatsoever. But certainly in racist societies, those kinds of parameters still exist and define us, as social identities within political systems in which those social identities have, incredibly important relevance. Excuse me, to the ways that we can live freely or without such freedoms, right? And so that artificial construct of race, this like this binary construct of gender, all of these parameters, particularly under fascist governments, define the manners in which we live, the ways in which we can live safely, and the ways that we must live in not necessarily fear, but observing those elements in the social construct that basically, let's just put it honestly, are attempting to destroy us, right? Okay, so so again, I suppose you could say that even thinking about that, the phenomenological relationship between, let's say, a referent, right, and the way that it can be interpreted metaphorically or allegorically is also one of the parameters with which expression and communication exists within in the system. Because recently, I just got a space-time travel communication coordinate message, which was King, Porter, Stomp, and I thought about what that might mean in terms of the context of what we do, and of course, King can easily be interpreted as a reference to no kings. Stomp is close enough to Trump, and if you reorganize the letters and expand kind of your mindset around what might be going on, that message had something to do with, and I'll just put it simply in these terms, and then you can either get it or not, but it had something to do with 8946 month, right? So So that's a lot of work and interpretation. Excuse me, I've still got a little bit of a cold. I had a virus recently, and so in a mathematical system, like even degrees of freedom are organized around like variables that can be put into sets of equations and kind of like if you imagine like these algebraic sets, right, are filters of the way that these variables actually function. They're more or less like organizing sets into relationships of definitions within mathematical terms. But interpretation and hermeneutics and metaphor, are seldom so clear cut, right? And so you thinking about interpretation and thinking about the organization of these references in creative, right? Creative ways that refer back to the context, within which these messages are exchanged, and what might become instructions for the dancers. Even thinking about that in terms of like this idea of degrees of freedom becomes itself, right, a metaphor. Degrees of freedom, is, I'm just gonna go back to this page. This it is no longer systemic, right, in the same way, and these parameters can no longer be numbered in terms of a linear set, right, of counting numbers, but rather are open-ended. So in that sense, degrees of freedom, as it relates to that last notion of interpretation, is itself metaphorical. So it's a metaphor of a metaphor, right? So in any case, that's what I'm responding to today, and attempting to figure out how to do a space-time travel communication coordinate adjustment that brings all of this stuff together while paying attention to those redundancies in the two sets and everything else that need to be reorganized, and what we still have that exists on our plate, so to speak, that needs to be put up. Now, what the number was before, the one that was appealing to me was 10, 4. Was it 2? Yes, I think it was 10, 4, 2. And then if we go to that number, that is Inner City Unit, and the number is Man of Steel. And the reason that it was appealing to me is not because I wanted to talk about Superman at all. I mean, I really don't. But because one of the things that is on our plate, that we need to change is the Navajo playlist. And the reason that we need to change the Navajo playlist is because let me see if I can find the Navajo playlist before I start talking about it. Oh, we're on it. No, we're not on it yet. We're on Inner City Unit. All right. So I added some pieces from recently. I added some pieces of Kevin Yazzi's, and adding pieces in the Kevin Yazzie playlist changes the Navajo playlist, right? And we also added some Kevin Yazzie and Chivers Topa, and so that's there, and this new stuff hasn't been recorded in the space-time travel communication coordinate set adjustments yet, and I don't remember what the old number was, but it was considerably less, or not maybe considerably, but it was somewhat less than 164 songs. So we need to record these changes. So I'm just going to record them right now without the music, and try to do this fairly carefully so that you can follow it along, but by just, you know, scrolling down and not having an accompaniment of sound. This is indeed the new list, and I'm kind of running out of things to say because I'm paying attention more to what I'm doing with my scroll bar than I am with my discourse. But when I'm done with this, maybe I can talk about, you know, why that within this idea of these degrees of freedom and these parameters that I have for making the changes, even though it pointed right in the direction of this communication, Man of Steel, to one of the sets of changes, or one of the sets of motivations for change that we needed to make, that adjustment didn't appeal to me as more as the discussion of this whole idea of degrees of freedom. And of course, discussing the idea of degrees of freedom makes and returns this change, right? Returns this idea of this change to the idea of a meta-communicative system, because it's self-referential in the way that these degrees of freedom inform the change, and the degrees of freedom are always already informing these changes, but don't always get discussed and turned into discourse, right? So we have this confluence in this instance of the thematic concerns, right, of the element that's being referred to, that is this construct of degrees of freedom, and the way that influences the system and the changes in the system itself. So it's meta in two senses. It's meta in the way that the system is undergoing a transformation, and it's meta in the sense that it's self-referential as well, and probably in other ways too. If we look up let's say we do an internet search for Superman. News. DC revealed which hero can kill Superman, then made the Man of Steel. I think this probably says something like even stronger or something like that. DC just delayed my adventures with Superman. Some basketball stuff. Superman will return. James Gunn's Superman follow-up takes flight with, you know, and in terms of the political parameters of what we do, this doesn't easily lend itself to political satire or critique or you know, information, or I mean we could certainly like bend it in that direction, but it would be hard to bend it in that direction using the Delbert Black Horse, I think, and since that's another one of the parameters, then like that satirical bend would I don't know. It seems like it's forced, and this discussion, you know, seems like it's a lot easier. So I think what we'll do in this instance is go ahead and make the changes which we've already made available and visible, right? Making the invisible visible is part of this project. We've already made them visible, and I think what we can just call this as something like, you know, we'll begin with that long title, and you know, which let's see if I can find one that's stated here. Not necessarily not how to discuss the adjustment of space-time travel communication coordinates, and then all of these as is, right? You know, as, you know, perhaps something as simple as the difference between space-time travel communication coordinate 104, I think it was -2, is that correct? -104. Yes, -2, 1, 2, and the difference between complex space-time travel communication coordinate 104-2 and complex space-time travel communication coordinate 105-210.